The Bridges Burn podcast is brought to you by Youth Bar, Halifax's home for science-driven aesthetics and care you can trust.
Their expert team delivers natural results with personalized care in a friendly, welcoming environment.
As a Bridges Burn podcast listener, you're invited to use the exclusive code BridgesBurn for special pricing on your first Botox or filler treatment or one of their other many services.
You can follow at Youth Bar HFX on Instagram to check them out and book your visit today.
This is Bridges Burned with Megan and Amy. Like a lot of amazing women that we're interviewing, Priya Sam dreamed of being on TV her whole life. She did all the things we're told to do in this industry: work hard, take every opportunity, even if you're tired or it doesn't pay, and prove that you deserve to be where you are. Once she did get hired into the industry, it didn't quite feel the way she thought it would. It wasn't the dream she was sold, and she's going to tell us all about it today. So Priya, thank you so much for talking to us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
What made you want to get into media industry in the first place?
So I feel like I've been surrounded by news and media since I was a kid. My parents were newer immigrants to Canada, and they always had the radio on. They were always reading the newspaper. It was really their way of learning about this new country and this new culture that they had joined. They immigrated from India. So I was always curious. I loved reading. I loved stories. So I was always asking all these questions. And yeah, I remember from a young age, watching TV reporters and thinking like, I want to do that one day. And yeah, so I think like my interest was there from a young age. And I kind of like most people, went in different directions throughout my teenage years. I thought about maybe being a teacher, but I really always came back to this love of stories and sharing information. So it started from a young age and kind of just really grew from there.
So where did you go to school? And tell us about all the kind of extra work you were doing while you were trying to become a TV host.
Yeah, so I did my undergrad at Western. It was a degree and concurrent degree and diploma program with Fanshawe College. So I did a degree in media, information, and technoculture, and then a diploma in broadcast journalism. So while I was there, I did an internship with 680 News in Toronto. So that was kind of like my first real newsroom experience. And then I took a bit of a detour after my undergrad. I actually went and taught English in South Korea for a while. Yeah. So like big detour, although I did do some writing actually for an English publication while I was there. But then I came back, I moved to Halifax and did my master's. And that's really when I started to get into my journalism career. So while I was there, I had emailed all of the TV stations in Halifax and I was like, hey, do you need a volunteer? I'll come in, I'll do anything, I'll make coffee, I'll bring your, take your guests to the green room, whatever you need. And I didn't hear anything back. So I sent the follow-ups, and then the news director in Halifax replied, and he was like, oh, I actually might have a job for you. And I was like, whoa, even better if I could get paid, great. So he was actually speaking at my to my class shortly after I'd sent that email. So he came after we met up, and it was he was like, I have basically it's a newsroom assistant. The main part of the job was rolling the teleprompter during the live newscasts, but it was also answering phones, printing scripts, doing some light writing here and there. So it was great. I mean, I was ready to volunteer, and I got this opportunity to actually get paid and work behind the scenes and be part of a real newsroom while I was doing my master's. So that was my first job.
How soon after that did you start actually on air?
I got that job in December of 2013. And then I finished my degree in May. And during that time, I was just doing behind the scenes stuff. So I was doing all of that newsroom assistant work. And then a few months later that summer, and I should say, I also would come in on my days off. Yes, of course. And shadow the full-time reporters so I could learn from them. So I made it really clear once I started, this is my goal. This is what I'm working towards. And yeah, there were some of the reporters that were really great, and they let me tag along with them. I studied how they worked, learned how to meet deadlines, learned their strategies for getting interviews. So I learned a lot obviously unpaid, as you mentioned in the introduction. And I was also, so I was doing my master's, I was working part-time in a clothing store, and I was doing this. And so I was like, I was in my early 20s. And so I was like, I can survive off 4 hours of sleep, but like, I definitely couldn't do that now. Anyway, so I did that for a few months. And then in July of that year, so 2014, one of the reporters was going on vacation, and lucky me, there was absolutely no one else to fill in for her. So that's when I got my first opportunity to be on air. So it was 5 days. And by that point, I had been on those shadowing days, those unpaid shadowing days. I would put together my own version of that reporter's story. I would send it to producers, get feedback. So I feel like they had started to see like, okay, she's like really serious about this. Obviously, I think we can trust her. But that 5 days I knew was like sink or swim. Like, you need to meet all your deadlines. You need to like not be annoying, honestly. Like, get your work done. Show us that you can do this. And thankfully it went really well. So then it was a year of like, I was doing everything. One day I was rolling the teleprompter. The next day I was reporting. I learned how to do the weather, so I would fill in like on the weekends. So, and I'm sure for any of your listeners who work in media and have started out, like that's just how it is often and at the beginning, right? So it was another full year before I got a full-time job.
Yeah. What point now, right? Your full-time job to when you were in media, where you like, I made it. This is my dream job and I made it.
Yeah. I think when I got that first full-time job, I was just elated. I remember because I knew, and it's even more challenging now to get that full-time job, and so this was like about 10 years ago, and it was really hard. Like, a lot of people would be part-time for years, and so that I remember
part-time for life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the norm now. And so I remember like when I got that first full-time job, I was so elated. And I just felt like, yeah, I think I felt a lot of relief too.
Right. Because you worked so hard and it's finally there.
Yeah.
You've got everything you thought you wanted. And then when did it hit you when all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, like, I'm not happy. My body's literally telling me that this is not right.
It was definitely a slow burn. And I think there was a lot of me trying to convince myself that this was normal. For me, it was a lot of microaggressions, a lot of these like small moments. I always describe it as like death by 1,000 paper cuts. The first few times, like, and I'll give you a few examples. Like, so first of all, in my newsroom, there were rare, like at a few points, there was another person of color, but like, generally, like I was the only one, and certainly like the only woman of color. I actually replaced my first full-time job. I replaced the only other woman of color in the newsroom, and that first job was a news anchor and morning show host, and she was the only news anchor that didn't have a company phone, and she'd been fed this story that like, you're at your desk more than everyone else, so like, why do you need a company phone? Which was like ridiculous. Like, she was at her desk just as much as everyone else was.
Right.
I was like, I kind of picked up the battle and was like, I want a company. Like, this is ridiculous. It took me a year to get a company phone. So yeah, so like that was one thing. And then there were a lot of moments of me asking questions and just being completely shut down. So like things like, hey, just curious, like, why are we mentioning the race of this person in this story when it's not relevant to the story? And I would get, oh, you're so sensitive about these things, right? And those are the kinds of reactions that really started to pile up for me. I actually feel like, unfortunately, some of my worst experiences were with women in the newsroom, but ultimately, like, the leaders in all the newsrooms I worked in were white men. And those, like, I think sometimes people who watching TV, they're like, oh, there's so much diversity in Canadian TV. But when you look at the people who make decisions, there isn't, you know, and that's what people don't see behind the scenes. So so it was definitely a combination of both men and women in leadership who were making those comments. I did have one like particularly bad manager who was a man who would he wouldn't even try to hide his like racism, you know, like I would pitch a story about a community of color and he'd be like, I don't think our audience cares about that.
Oh,
so
what?
like those are the kinds of like that kind of boldness in leadership, you know, toward like with these like racist and sexist views that trickles down, right? And so when that's the example that's being set by leaders, of course your employees are going to think that's okay, right? Yeah. And that's really what was happening around me. I didn't feel like I didn't experience many situations where I had an ally. And there were a couple, you know, once in a while someone would sort of like stand with me. But I mean, that maybe was like 1% of the time. Most of the time, like that conversation, that question about race happened in front of like 30 people and no one said anything. No one said, maybe we should just like hear her out. Like I didn't expect, you know, newsrooms are supposed to be places for healthy debate. And so my expectation in raising those questions was not that someone would be like, oh, Priya, you're right, let's change that. But it was that someone would be like, oh, like, tell me more about that. Like, where are you, like, tell me your thoughts. Like, what's your process in thinking about that? So we can at least have a conversation.
Did you feel like you could speak up at first? Or did you feel like, oh, I don't want to burn bridges. And if, you know, they're saying don't do this, then you just kind of stay mute?
I definitely felt more bold in the beginning. And that I slowly started to like shrink back into my shell to protect myself. So yeah, I think, you know, I made those attempts in the beginning to say something. And then as I was met with this like irritation and like people just shutting me down, I just stopped and I was like, what's the point? But the problem with that is then like you have this like internal anger that builds up, right? And frustration. And then also it really chips away at your confidence. Like I remember so many moments of gaslighting myself because I started to think like, am I being sensitive about that? Maybe I am part of the problem. You know, maybe I just need to put my head down and keep going. And that was the worst part for me, because I would have described myself before as someone who was confident, optimistic, and I just became negative, like insecure, you know, like not wanting to share my thoughts and ideas, like for fear of like how I would be treated. So I really started to pick my battles. Like if I felt really strongly about something, you know, I would say something. But yeah, it definitely changed the way I expressed myself and behaved at work.
I find it so sad because a lot of people get into media. I know I did, and I'm assuming you did, because we wanted to be able to share our opinions and share stories. And then when you really get into it, just like you said, they don't really care about the stories we're sharing at all. They care about the money side of it. They care about, is a good story for them and what they would like. And it's actually so disappointing that it wasn't what we thought it was when we first got into it.
I agree. I definitely felt like, oh, I'm going to have this platform to, you know, elevate the voices of women and underrepresented groups. And yeah, you're right. You realize like you can pitch all of the stories that you want, but ultimately someone else is going to make that decision. And I can think of so many stories that I thought like this needs to be told, you know, and like it just got shut down.
Well, speaking of stories, do you have any stories about burning bridges or anything that happened to you in the newsroom that you just want to share? Because we'd like to hear all the tea.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in that Halifax newsroom, I definitely was really ready to leave. I think one of the early things that happened to me, I mentioned when I got that first full-time job, and I was just like, this is the best thing ever. And one of my, I was definitely like riding a wave of like excitement after that. But one of the first times that wave crashed for me was when one of the other hosts, she had an interview scheduled, and she worked on the morning show as well, and she couldn't make it. So they needed someone to do the interview for her, and it was like a lighter segment, something like different than what I normally did because I was doing news. I was like, oh, I can do it, no problem. So I did the interview, and I was like, oh, I actually like really enjoyed this. So after I called her just to fill her in, I was like, oh, this is how everything went. And I said, by the way, like, if you ever need anyone to do that again, like, let me know. I really enjoyed that. And she was like, well, I don't think we'll be needing anyone to do that again since you already have a job and it's not my job. And I was like, okay. And I was like, okay, that was weird. But then I'm like, she had a weird day today. I know, like, she had to leave for an appointment or something. So like, just like, don't read too much into it. And then she came in the next day and completely ignored me. And like, we worked on the show together. And like, this woman had like at least 10 or 15 years, probably more, of experience on me. She was someone I was like very excited to work with and learn from. So I was crushed. I'm like, she like hates me. She won't look at me. She won't say anything to me. And this went on for like a while before I finally approached her and like said, can we have a conversation? And then she basically told me like she felt like I was trying to steal her job. And I was like, I was so confused. You know,
I was wondering if that was behind it. Do you feel like women are still pitted against each other like they were years and years ago for each other's job? Is that why maybe she felt that way?
I think she definitely had her own history of work situations that led to her feeling that way. Absolutely. I don't know that at that moment anyone was like pitting us against each other. I'm like, I have like 3 weeks. I've been in this full-time job for like, I don't know, like 3 weeks or 3 months or whatever it was. Like,
Yeah.
There's no way I would even be considered for your job. Like, it was just so wild to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like there is still this scarcity mindset right now, and even more so now, of like, well, there aren't that many jobs, so you kind of always feel like you're competing with the people around you.
Which is so sad too, because, you know, I worked at the building right next to your building for the same company. And sometimes I was like, wow, they must have it so good over there, you know, and there is a lot of women who work there. And I feel like what a beautiful thing it would be if we all worked together and had each other's back, you know, if everybody's like, no, well, let's try that. Because while most of, you know, the managers are male, a lot of the employees are female. And you just think, wow, if we had all come together to try this, what could have been?
I totally agree. I think that was one of the most disappointing things for me in the industry, was thinking I would have this like sisterhood with all of the other women I worked with, and then realizing like, oh, I have to watch my back more than I thought I would. And, you know, of course, there were some really wonderful people too. But you certainly, anytime you went somewhere new or someone new started, you had to like really hold back and like wait and see like what they were really like to know if there was that level of trust there or not.
How many years did you work in media in total?
Almost 7 in total. Yeah.
Wow. So around what year were you like, damn, I don't know what this is, but I don't think this is right anymore?
I would say around 2017. That's when I really thought, and at the time I'd only worked in that one newsroom in Halifax. So I thought, maybe this is the problem, actually. Like, maybe it's this newsroom, you know, I'm in a city that's like a smaller city, a less diverse city. Maybe if I move somewhere bigger, that will make a difference. So that's when I started trying to move to Toronto. And I ended up getting a job here in 2018 in Toronto. So, and it was still with, so they actually like moved me here. And so I felt like that was my fresh start and like everything was going to change. And what I realized when I got here is like it was the same problems, just a new cast of characters. And I mean, I didn't feel like there was more diversity around me. There were actually more women in leadership, but again, like in upper management, it was still all men. And a lot of the women at that time who had ascended to those leadership positions, they had gotten there by being part of this like boys club. So it was this mentality, right? And so for me, things were just not any different. And I just felt like that's when I really knew I just need to leave the industry. And I really started to struggle with my mental health during that time.
Well, and I and Megan as well, we went to like radio broadcasting school, a 2-year program, but you went and got your master's in journalism and all of this. So doing that, how did you feel like being like, oh, wow, I spent all this time and money studying this? That must have really affected you as well.
Yeah, I think that was hard. And what was really hard is people on the outside just constantly being like, wow, you are living the dream. You're on national TV. You like got into this big role in like 5 years into your career. That never happens. Like you have a stylist who picks your clothes out. You get your hair and makeup done every day. Like to the outside world, everyone was just like, you're so successful. So when you have everyone in your life telling you that and you're like, I'm literally crumbling on the inside, I'm crying every day, I can't sleep, it was really hard to grapple with. And I mean, I think a lot of cultures are like really push you to be like, I'm strong. I can like overcome like all the hard stuff, you know? And for me too, there was like this sense of like, oh, my family has so much pride in me. I don't want to let them down. And so there were a lot of layers that led to that being really, really challenging for me to admit. And honestly, I really didn't admit it to a lot of people. Like my partner knew what was going on, but I tried to like leave as quietly as I could. And when people, I during the worst of it, I ended up going to a crisis counselor because I didn't sleep for like almost a week. And I was like crying for hours. I would get up, go do the morning show for 3 hours, go back to my office and cry, go home, continue to cry. Like it was awful. And I started going to therapy then. And that's when I was like, I have to get out. So I just started looking for other jobs. I ended up, after finishing that, I was on a 1-year contract in that job that I moved to Toronto for. I got another TV job because I still hadn't found something outside of the industry, but I was only there for 5 months before I got a job in tech. And but during that time, I really didn't tell that many people that I was even looking. And so I think it definitely came as a shock when I left. And when people would ask me, why are you leaving? Or why did you leave? I would just be like, oh, the industry instability, like finances, whatever. I would just like kind of like give a generic answer. It wasn't until like 2 years later that I really actually started sharing that like, no, I like literally had a mental breakdown while I was working on national TV, and that's why I left.
Funny, well, not funny, but when you're talking about how great it looks to the outside world, there were so many times, on air, I'd be like, oh, groceries are so expensive and, you have to do this. And so many people would write in and be like, you're a radio personality. You don't even know what problems with finances are. And I'm like,
way out of everyone we know.
Yeah, I'm no Ryan Seacrest. I'm pretty sure you could put most of the women across Canada work in media and we still wouldn't come close to his salary. But like you said, the perception when really you're struggling with your mental health and your finances and they go hand in hand and you're not sleeping. And then you start to feel like you're not doing your job as well as you could because you're exhausted and you're trying to always just smile it away.
Yeah, it's true. Like that masking is so real. And yes, the salary part of it is very interesting too, because you're right. I mean, I think it's like people just think it's the same as like American media where like those people are making like some of them are making millions of dollars, right? And it's just that's not the landscape in Canada at all.
It took me a minute. I knew, similar to you, a few years before I left that I needed to leave, but it really did take a few years for me to get my head around how I was going to tell people I was leaving. And also like, I can't, I've built this thing and people think this and people want me to be this. And not so much my parents or my family. I think they knew how hard it was on me, but it's crazy how we put people's opinions and thoughts on our life and we are miserable. And I I had a mental breakdown too. I feel like everyone we've interviewed in media has had some sort of mental breakdown, essentially.
Yeah, I didn't realize how common it was, honestly, until after I left. And then I remember the first time I shared anything about what had happened was on my own podcast. And I got so many messages from people who were like, I had the same experience. Like, thank you for sharing this. I thought I was the only one. And I was like, wow. So silently, so many of us are struggling, are going through this, feeling so alone. And also, there's that fear of like, well, I don't want to lose my job because will I ever get another one?
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, even when I left those first 2 years, I didn't know. I'm like, maybe I'll want to go back. I have no idea. So I didn't want to like burn any bridges or like ruin any relationships. I mean, now, like literally, I've lit every single bridge on fire and blown it up with dynamite because I've like said how terrible it was to work in every newsroom I worked in. Obviously, I have no interest in going back at this point, but I was very fearful of doing that for a long time.
I think they put that fear in us when we start the job, any job. So we're always afraid to say what we think, to say what is actually happening. But I think it's kind of crazy because, well, I don't think any of us will get hired into mainstream media again. I feel like I'm very okay with that now, because if what we are saying is burning bridges, nothing we have said is actually that bad. It's just what's happened. It's the realistic situation.
Yes. One of the things I always thought was so just backwards is like, we would report on stories like this happening in other workplaces, but they were happening in our own. And in a way, I think that's why so many of these negative experiences have been protected for people in media. Like the companies have been protected because we don't report on ourselves very often, right? So like what's happening in those walls rarely is like making it into the media. And then like you started to see some of these like bigger stories break, right? And that's when it became a little bit more exposed. But it's still happening today, right? Like I still get messages from people all the time who are like, oh, I finally left and like things were so horrible. I remember listening to your podcast and thinking like, that's me, but like I just have to keep going. And it's like, it's still happening today.
Like I said, I knew you from Halifax, and then you left. And then I remember one day your social media just popped up, and you're like, "When your dream job wasn't your dream job," and I was like, "Damn, girl, she's talking about it." And you're always like, but then good for you, because it's a fear that we have to talk about the truth.
Yes, even though like as a journalist, you're like literally supposed to be the truth, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's wild. Can I ask you a little bit about your mental health journey? You know, you had, we keep calling it nervous breakdown, mental breakdown, but I guess that is essentially what it is. You've come to your breaking point. What did you do in terms of therapy? And what was your journey like to heal yourself?
So that first experience, and I'd never been to therapy before. I mean, I wish now, I'm like, I wish I'd been going to therapy like my whole life. But
yeah, same.
But yeah, that was during that breakdown, just to like tell you exactly sort of like what was happening. Like I thought things were going like as well as they could be at my job in Toronto, but somebody who worked with me made a complaint to management that I was bullying them. And I still don't know, like, I was never told what happened. So basically, I was confronted with, hey, we've heard that, like, things are getting a little toxic behind the scenes and that you've been a big part of it. And the word bullying has been used. And I was like, I literally was like, what? Like, I had no idea what I was being accused of. So I was like, I'm really surprised to hear this. Like, can you give me some more information? Like, I'm worried maybe like I said something that someone misinterpreted, and I would like really appreciate the opportunity to like address it, to apologize if I like hurt someone's feelings. And it was just like, no. Like, you don't need to know anything more than this, but basically, like, if we hear anything else, like, there are going to be consequences. And so at that time, I was on a contract, and for anyone who doesn't know how entertainment contracts work, like, you basically, your management can decide they don't like you one day and they can fire you. Like, they don't need any other reason than that. So I wasn't in a union at this point or anything, and I was like, I don't have someone who can like pick up my rent if like I can't pay it. So that was like the last straw. And after I was in a situation where I'm like, I've never heard of this happening to anyone. this kind of stuff happens all the time to women and to people of color, where someone makes a complaint and that person doesn't even get a chance to share their side of the story. Whereas like, if I made a complaint about a white man, you know damn well that management would go to that person and be like, hey, Priya said so-and-so, said X, Y, and Z. Like, what's your side of the story? There was none of that. So that was like the last straw. So after that's when the like crying all day, all night, not sleeping.
Do you think the story was true? Sorry to interrupt. Did you think it was made up just because someone was against you or didn't like you or?
Yeah, I do think so. I think somebody didn't like me. I think somebody felt like very insecure and I was like an easy target. Yeah, I mean, I honestly, like, I still don't know like what happens.
The worst part when you have mental health problems, it's like, okay, so you don't know, and that just runs your anxiety, and you're running through every single thing you've said in the last times to who and trying to like flake flu to figure out what happens.
I can tell you like very confidently that like I've never bullied anyone in my entire life. But like, could I have said something that was misinterpreted? Maybe. But like, is that something you go to management with? Or is, if it happens one time, is that something you go to that person with? Do you know what I mean? So that's why I can confidently say that like somebody like made something up. Somebody felt very insecure. I was an easy target. I mean, obviously, like I have a pretty good idea of like exactly what happened. I like don't want any lawsuits coming my way. So I'm not going to name any names. I think we've all worked with someone who is insecure, who has more power than us and uses it to their advantage. And like, that's exactly what happened. Like sometimes when I watch the show, the morning show, I'm like, yeah, that's accurate. Like, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so that's when I started going to, you asked me about my mental health journey. So, so that's when I started going to therapy, and I did like really intense therapy to just get through that so I could start sleeping again and really just manage my day to day. And that therapist really also helped me to see like that one thing I really needed to do is to protect myself and stop at work. You don't need to be friends with anyone. Stop going above and beyond. Go in, do your job. Do not rock the boat. Do not reveal anything about yourself that people don't need to know. So I just really pulled back, and I started to also, that's when I started to really look at jobs outside of the industry. Then like after that, I really didn't go to therapy for a little while after that. Then about a year after I left, that's when I started again. And that's really when I like revisited everything and started to understand like kind of like the deeper issues there, because I definitely had a lot of shame when I left. You know, I felt like I hated when people would be like, why would you leave? That seems like such a like great job. Yeah. And it took me, again, like it took me 2 years before I could really talk about it. And even now, to be honest, like sometimes people say things that I just find triggering. Like people, for example, one of the things that I find the most triggering is when someone says, yeah, it's a really cutthroat industry. And I'm like, no. Cutthroat, I can handle. I went from rolling a teleprompter to being a national morning show host in 5 years. Cutthroat is not the problem. Racism, sexism, and discrimination, that's a problem. And that's not something that you just like tough it out and put up with, because it is wrong, it is toxic behavior, and it should not be tolerated. And that has nothing to do with something being competitive and cutthroat. Those are very different things.
So we're clearly two white women who've had our struggles in media. So obviously you add another layer on there. Is there, I'm guessing, many things that have probably been said to you that people didn't even realize that would be hurtful or are racist?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the worst moments for me, unfortunately, was when I got the Toronto job. So obviously I was extremely excited. Like, not only was I moving to Toronto, but it was like a job on a national show. And the way management handled it in Halifax was absolutely horrendous. So first of all, one of my colleagues, who was a white woman, had also applied for the job and she didn't get it. So the first thing my manager said to me when I told him was, we're going to have to be really careful how we talk about this because we don't want to upset so-and-so. I was like,
God forbid.
Okay, like, how about congrats first? No.
Yeah.
Okay. So like that was obviously terrible. And then several people in that newsroom were like, you're so lucky you're brown. You'll always have a job in this industry, like to my face. So it just really minimized any talent or hard work. You know, it was like, you literally got this job because like you're a woman of color. So that was pretty awful.
Did you call those people out when they said something?
No, I didn't. And I would handle that very differently now. But I think at the time, I just didn't even know. I didn't
It
even
was
know.
probably shocking to you to hear that in that moment.
Kind of freeze. You're not expecting that. You're like, never mind that I got a master's in journalism and did all this schooling and, this is all paying off now. No, it's because of my color.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And you know what? I think like we got so much more language to talk about racism through like the BLM movement. And I don't even know if I knew it was wrong, but I don't even know if I at that moment knew to be like, that's racist. Like, I know that sounds a bit strange to say right now, but like, I don't even know. Like, I remember like telling my partner about it after and being like, that's awful. Even I don't know if I was like now I'm like, that's clearly racist. Yeah. I think like at the time I was hurt by it. And I felt like it really minimized my talent. Yeah, I don't even think I thought to be like, you're being racist.
I think in like 2020, that's kind of when all of the movements really like hit the fan.
Yeah.
And I think even I remember sexist things that were said to me before that. And I knew in my heart, I'm like, that's fucking rude. How dare you talk to me like that? But I didn't, again, same as you. I didn't have the language. I didn't know how to stand up for myself properly like I would now.
Yes. Yeah. And like now I love seeing like the next generation coming up because they have so many of the tools and so much of the language that like we didn't have, And I hope things are better for them. I mean, I know there's still a lot of problems, but yeah. And I think that's also one difference with our generation. And I don't want to like criticize every woman in the generation before us, because obviously there are some wonderful women there, but a lot of them there were even fewer women in the industry at the time. And so a lot of them who rose to higher positions, they did so by putting their heads down, by working hard, by ignoring all of this stuff, or by being part of that boys club, right? And so sometimes like I had a few mentors who I asked for advice and they were like, you just got to put your head down and keep going. You got to like cry in the bathroom, cry in your car. Don't let anyone see that. And I understand why they gave me that advice, because that's what worked for them. That is not the advice. I promised myself I would never give that advice to another woman, because that is like not the advice we're giving in 2025. Like, no.
I actually am really proud of Gen Z for a lot of reasons. I think they do not stand for shit. They also do not work for free, like we have all done so many times. They're like, nah, not doing that. And I know there's an extent to everything, but for the most part, I think it's really amazing how they are. And I think we were taught by the women before us, and we're teaching the women, I guess, that are younger than us, but they've taught me a lot of stuff too.
I totally agree. Yeah, I'm in this mentorship program where I mentor a high school girl every year. The things I learn from them, like, you're so right. The way they stand up for themselves, I'm like, this is so impressive. And like, yes to more of this energy. It's really incredible.
You decide to leave media. I think for somebody like me or Megan, like 20 years of my life, well, I didn't decide, I was kicked out. It's just scary to think, what's next? This is where I come from. I'm leaving my bubble. What was that transition like for you?
It was definitely scary. It was probably about a year of really trying to leave and find a job in another industry. And I just realized, I'm like, I don't even know what kind of jobs are out there. I knew about PR and comms, and, because like so many former media people go to PR and comms, it's natural transition, but I didn't really know about any other options. So I just started talking to people, and I one day had a conversation with this woman who worked in tech. I knew nothing about working in tech, and like, what does that even mean? And she worked as, she's basically a product expert on a sales team, but she was a former journalist, and she was like, I actually use my skills every day. It's pitching, storytelling, presenting, like lots of research on the different companies that you're working with and that you're pitching ideas to. I was like, oh, like I feel like I can do that. I love that she still got to do a lot of storytelling, because I was really like worried about leaving. And I think like that was one of the saddest things for me, is like I never stopped loving my work. It was like all of the things around it that were causing problems. So I thought, like, this sounds like a really great opportunity for me to use my skills in a new way. And because her boss had already hired someone with a background in journalism, he already saw like the connections. So she introduced me to him. They weren't hiring at the time, but we like built a bit of a relationship. And then when they were finally hiring a few months later, we got in touch and I interviewed and they hired me. So I was excited, but also terrified. And I remember I went to Vancouver to onboard for that job. And when I got there, I was the only person coming from like outside of tech. And I feel like I didn't understand. I felt like people were speaking another language because there were so many acronyms and words that I had never heard before. I literally went home with my notebook, was like half notes and half things I needed to Google because I was like, I have no idea what any of these things are. So the learning curve was really steep. For the first little while, I was like, I don't know, maybe I will go back to media. Who knows? Once I remember one of my first days in the office, this person I'd never met before, a manager came over and he was like, oh, hi, introduced himself. And he was like, so how's everything going? And I was like, good. And he was like, tell me more. And I was like, oh, you actually like, want to have a conversation with me. You like didn't just come over to be like, you missed a deadline or you're behind or like whatever. I'm like, I'm so used to my workplace interactions being so negative that like I like forgot how to have a normal work conversations. And then like my managers just being like, you did such a great job. We're so impressed. I was like,
validation? What is that?
Sorry, what? I was what?
honestly, like that, it was so I felt like a shock to my system. So like all of these moments, like where I was just like, you know, as much as there were struggles and there was a big learning curve, I just felt so appreciative for being treated well, being respected, like being in a psychologically safe work environment. I remember like my partner, I came home like probably a couple weeks in and he's like, I'm so happy when like I hear the key. He worked from home and I was working in the office at the time. So it's like, now when I hear the key in the door and you're coming home, he's like, you walk in and you're like, guess what happened at work today? And he's like, the last 2 years, it's like every time you come home, I had to brace myself because it was, you'll never guess what happened. So-and-so said this happened. Like it was like negative and, you know, I was upset and he had to console me. And so those signs for me, like all of that positive just outweighed any of the challenges that were there in the beginning.
It's weird how like bad we are treated in media. Since I've left, I've done a million different things. And when they say things like, oh, you've worked too many days in a row, you have to take a day off. Like, I have to take a day off, okay? Or you have these benefits, you need to use, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's the little things that are actually normal that we got used to that not existing in our lives for years. And I'm like, how does this industry still get away with this?
I know. I don't get it anymore because I'm like, there isn't even like glitz and glamour there anymore. You know, like most people, it's like you're a one-person show. You're the videographer, you're the editor, you're the reporter. So yeah, I agree with you. I'm just so surprised. And, you know, once in a while I hear someone say, like, I have a couple of friends who work at and I think, you know, it depends on your team and your manager and who actually have like pretty decent work environments and good managers. And like they get those like, hey, you need to take a day off or you covered a really difficult trial. You need to take a couple days off. You need to go to like take advantage of the counseling we offer.
Yeah.
So like I'm glad to hear that though there are some of those stories, but that's still not the norm. You know, I think we're a long way away from that still, which is ridiculous.
Being a journalist and, you know, broadcasting the news, you look now at younger generations and how they're getting their news. And a lot of places are TikTok and Reddit. And we were talking about how radio is just not growing, as is a newsroom. You know, it's very slow, you know, the stories. You're running a newsroom now. What do you think the changes would need for people to turn on the 6 o'clock news again and be like invested, not fake media, and understand it and respect it again?
Honestly, I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't think there's a path to that. I think like one of the sad things to me about Canadian media is that a lot of the bigger companies just didn't adopt digital sooner. Like, why isn't there a newscast on Instagram? Like, you know, why isn't like there an IG live from every hour on the hour about like the top stories. Like there are so many opportunities to take advantage of these new platforms and these new ways and of sharing information and to meet people where they're at, you know? I mean, I guess the IG live thing isn't possible because now we have this like news ban on media anyway. So maybe that's an option. But I think there were so many opportunities to adopt these platforms earlier that, like, again, the people who run these organizations, the old white men at the top, were like, no, we're gonna keep doing what we've been doing. And like, look what happened. And now, I mean, a lot, like I know in particular, they don't care about journalism, right? Like that's the people running now are almost all of them are telecom executives. They come in, they look at spreadsheets, they look at numbers. They don't care about democracy, about like journalism's contribution to like Canadian society. That's like not something they care about. And I think there are still a lot of journalists who care about that, but they don't have power.
My family's from England, so I've traveled to England tons as a child. And every time I would go, the radio and the TV, so different there. It's so good. And I don't know what it's like now, but the last time I was there, listening to radio frequently, I was like, why can't Canada be like this? I feel like our media would be so much better at the moment if we had kind of, like you said, it's owned by just a few massive companies. They're really only concerned about numbers. They really don't care. A lot of this radio stations are all syndicated across the country. It's not new. It's not really local. It's sad.
It's really, really sad. And you're right. Like there are other countries that have done it better. And like, why hasn't adapted the way the BBC has? Like, it's a really good question. When you think about, I mean, it would be so interesting to actually I'm not like I wouldn't be able to look at their budget and like probably understand everything, but it would be so interesting to do a comparison between like where like the BBC is invested and where the is invested to see like where did we miss the mark on trust and the quality of content, because if you know people will listen when there is good quality Canadian content out there. Like one of the podcasts I listen to a lot now is Canadaland, and they do a lot of great journalism there. So it's not like there's no demand for it, you know, like if anything, there's more demand than ever before. Yeah, like the mainstream media organizations have just really missed the mark. And like things like the 6 o'clock news, it's not going to be a thing anymore, you know?
No. And it's too bad. I used to work in Ottawa and they had a huge newsroom. And then slowly they're gone now, and it's syndicated news and all these people who are working out. But then you think, you know, when they take radio stations or television stations, especially out of small markets, that's where they should be. Those little small markets that really need, because nobody else is talking about what's going on. You look at like the mass shooting in 2020 here, you know, imagine a syndicated going on instead of having an actual news team out and about. Like those are missed opportunities of stories of your community, which is supposed to be the reason media is there.
100%. I agree with you. So like the rural communities absolutely suffer the most from that. And like it also, I think there's like a sense of pride that comes from knowing what's happening in your community. And like when you're just bombarded with what's happening in the US or like in the big cities, if you live in a smaller community, it like feels like what's happening in your world isn't important, and that it just shouldn't feel that way.
Yeah, it's all about independent journalism now. Just the people doing podcasts, or even people on Instagram, TikTok. That's kind of where it is now, which is sad because we've all gone to school for this one thing and it's just blown up.
But that's another thing too. I think you said you went to Fanshawe. I do believe they've stopped their program there. Maybe I could be wrong. I went to Algonquin College. There's no more broadcasting program there as well.
Yeah, I did hear that Fanshawe was, I'm not sure if they did or if it was like a part of like on the, like it was something that was potentially getting canceled. But yes, like it's so sad to see these programs disappear. And, you know, like one of the things I've realized since I left and, you know, I went into tech and then now I have my own business is the skills you learn in journalism and broadcasting. Like they're so valuable in like so many other industries. Like storytelling is such a valuable skill in like almost every job or every industry. And so Yeah, I think there was so much potential for like some of those programs to evolve too. And it's just really sad that a lot of them just got shut down.
So you were in tech and now you own your own business. Can you tell us a bit about your own business?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was working in tech, like I said, I had such a healthy work environment. I had amazing, like really great managers and teams. I always had this little part of me that was like, I still like, I would never go back to mainstream media, but I still miss like some of the satisfaction that I got from that job. The days when you like told a really important story or like you knew you made a difference in someone's life, right? I started looking for ways to kind of bring the storytelling into my tech jobs. And of course, I worked like with a sales team. So sales is all about storytelling. So there was a lot of opportunity there, but it wasn't the same. And then I was at a company called Hootsuite. That was my first tech job. And then I got recruited to a larger company called Slack. And during that process, when I was interviewing, I was like kind of surprised that I got recruited for the role because I didn't have that much experience. Like I had a year and a half of experience in tech, obviously. And then all the rest of my resume was in TV. But so I was like, I really need to like tell really strong stories in this interview. And I really need to focus on my storytelling skills, my presentation skills, my executive presence, because that's what stands out about me. Whereas my tech knowledge, like I can't compete with other candidates who have more experience. So I did that. I ended up getting the job and I knew through the process that they really wanted me. So I negotiated like a really significant salary raise. So when I left TV, I was making $80,000. And when this tech job was 160. Yeah. So within 2 years, I doubled my salary. And when I started at that new job, I started thinking about how I did that. And I'm like, wow, it was all stories. It was the way I told my story. And I started to see a lot of the women around me not telling their stories, kind of like shrinking back when executives would say, like, oh, how did you end up here? Or tell me how things are going with you. And like these women around me were like amazing, so accomplished. And I think I had just learned that through what happened in TV and this desperation to get out, I had to get really good at selling myself. And so I saw an opportunity to help other women build those skills too. So I started doing workshops where like I would help women uncover their most powerful stories and then learn how to use them in professional settings, in conversations with executives, in one-on-ones, and in job interviews. I remember after I did my first workshop at Slack, one of the women messaged me a few months later and she's like, hey, I just want to let you know, like I used that story that you helped me build to get promoted. And I was like, you did? And then some of the other women were like, hey, like you should do more of this. I would totally pay you. That's when like I was like, I think I have something here that combines everything that I've done and everything that I love. So I started building my business on the side, and then I left my tech job last February 2024. And I've been coaching women. I have like a group program and I do one-on-one work. And then I also do workshops mostly in corporate environments, all about how to use the power, how to find your most powerful stories, and then how to use them to stand out in professional settings.
What's your business called?
It's called Unleash Your Voice.
So it's kind of amazing because none of this was a waste. It was all meant to be exactly how it was supposed to be. You went to school, you studied the right thing, you had the experiences you need to have, although not great, but you are here now and I assume much happier.
So happy. So happy. And I love that you said it that way because I totally agree. I think sometimes when we're in those really hard moments, it's really hard to see that. It's hard to see that light at the end of the tunnel. And one thing, like for anyone who's listening who is in that hard time, I just want to say, like, for 2 years after I left, that time in my life in TV, like I just wanted to put it all in a box and put it on a shelf and never look at it, never talk about it again. But now I feel like I've been able to help so many other people because of it. And it's like this ball of darkness, like now there's so much light around it, and it doesn't mean that like I'm happy it all happened, but it does mean that I've been able to use some of it in a positive way and that it's not as dark as it was before.
See, I'm in my dark bubble right now because I have just in April was let go. And so it's still all fresh and new. And when you say the dark bubble, like even sometimes when we're doing our podcast and talking, I'm like, oh, but I shouldn't say that just yet, or I shouldn't say that. But just hearing everybody's stories and knowing that you're not alone, it really, it's really inspiring.
This whole podcast is going to be healing for us all.
Yes.
100%. Yes, it is. And like, I also like definitely am not, I would say I'm like an optimistic person, but I also don't like toxic positivity. And I remember that darkness, and it's really hard. And I think it's really great that you're having these conversations, because that's one thing that when I look back, like sometimes people are like, oh, would you have done anything differently? And one thing I wish I had done more of is just reach out to other people who were in the same situation, instead of like holding so much in and isolating myself. Because the moments when I did, like towards the end, that's when I really realized like, oh, I'm not alone, and it's not in my head, right? And I stopped like gaslighting myself so much. And it is so important to lean on other people who've had similar experiences, because you need someone who's just like, I get it. Like, I get it because I've been there.
Yeah. And there's so much more of us that we didn't even know how many women there were out there until we started talking about it, really.
Yeah, 100%. Oh my gosh, yes. Like, it's like unfortunate how many of us that there are. But I think in having these conversations, it's also how we make change. Like, I've never received any apologies from anyone who managed me when I was in TV, but I've heard from people who work in those newsrooms like things have changed. And they're not saying they're perfect. Maybe they've changed because they're scared, as they should be. But I have heard. And so I think like their actual change comes from having these conversations too, right?
When I left, I sent out an email that day, and I just said, you know, there are a lot of very talented people here, but essentially they're treated like shit, and we're not treated the way we should be. And I said a lot of things, and I sent it to everyone. I mean, if you guys were working there, you probably would have gotten it. I made sure I sent it to everyone. And I cannot tell you how many emails I got back from people who I did work with and people who were strangers. They said, this person still works at, and they sent this to me because I'm a previous employee. And I just thought, I know I pushed it with them. I know I'll never get hired again, but those made it worth it. Those comments made it completely worth it. And I hope things have changed since then, but I guess we'll never know.
Yes, but those things do make a difference though. Even like the fact that you made those people feel seen and heard and like sparked conversations, you know, they probably also felt a little bolder to share what they were going through, to maybe stand up for themselves. It does make a difference.
But you do feel isolated. You're either difficult, or you're sensitive, or you're hard to work with, or you're not pulling your weight, or you're not. And it's so you really start isolating yourself because you feel like the problem. And then you're like, oh, wait, maybe it's this place that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. And that isolation, it makes it even worse.
It does.
Right? Like, because then you're just in your own head, and then you're like replaying things and then you start to question yourself, and then you're showing up differently in the outside. Like those. Yeah, I do think there's so much power in being able to talk to other people who have had similar experiences and to support each other. And even just to remove that layer of like, this is not in my head. This is real and it's not okay.
If there's one thing you could think back to your media career and say you loved it or you miss it, what would that be?
I mean, definitely that satisfaction after a day where you just did a story that you knew was going to make a difference. I remember like one of the stories I did was like a deeper investigative story when I lived in Halifax, and it was about one of the there was a Black community there that lived in an area called Africville, which doesn't exist anymore. But there was this whole story about the church in that community and how the city had demolished it before they actually had purchased it from the community. And it was like a decades long struggle for the community and members of like the community of Africville to like get justice. And I come in, I like went to this event and it was like, oh, we're marking the 50th anniversary of this church being demolished, but really we're celebrating the impact that the church had. It was a big part of the community. And once I started looking into it, I was like, wow, nobody really knows what happened. So anyway, I did this investigation and I ended up finding these unfiled documents in the Nova Scotia archives with the help of an archivist. And we were able to prove that like the community was right. That church, the city like went in the cover, like in the middle of the night, demolished the church when they like didn't have the legal ability to do that. And so it was like so satisfying for that community. It's actually like a whole exhibit in their museum now, like that story. And like those are the things that I miss, because I'm like, I actually made a difference. I brought justice to a group of people that deserved it. So yeah, I would say like I definitely miss that part of it sometimes still.
Impacting your community. There's just something beautiful about it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. I just think it's really great that you two are doing this podcast too, and that you're bringing all of these stories to light, because more people need to know them. And I know that women from other industries are going to resonate with this too.